I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 80 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. We'll start with a few reminders. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. Just so you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. Please, colleagues, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, October 19th, 2023, the committee resume its study of electronic logging device requirements and animal transport.
Today's witnesses from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency today, we have Dr. Mary Jane Ireland, who is Executive Director of the Animal Health Directorate and Chief Veterinarian Officer for Canada. Welcome back, Dr. Ireland. We're going to have to set up a cot outside the room. We've had you here quite a bit, so but your testimony is important, and we appreciate your willingness to help indulge us here. And from the Department of Transport, we have Melanie Vanstone, who is the Director General, Multimodal and Road Safety Programs. Welcome, Ms. Vanstone. I understand, I think you might be starting off our testimony today. Colleagues, we're going to allow for 5 minutes of opening statements. I'll be a little bit flexible given we only have two witnesses. And then I intend to do essentially 2 rounds of questions. So it would be six minutes for every party, 5 for Liberals, 5 for Conservatives, 5 Liberals, 2.5, 2.5, and then 5 and 5. And then we'll break in afterwards for in-camera to be able to talk about where we want to go from here. But Ms. Vanstone, over to you for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the federal hours of service regime for commercial drivers as it applies to the animal transport sector. First, I'd like to start by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people since time immemorial. In Canada, commercial vehicle safety is a shared responsibility among federal and provincial and territorial governments and commercial vehicle owners and operators. Under the Motor Vehicle Transport Act and its commercial vehicle drivers' hours of service regulations, Transport Canada is responsible for certain operational matters relating to commercial motor vehicle activity, including hours of service to mitigate risk of fatigue for commercial vehicles that cross provincial and international borders. Provinces and territories are responsible for the enforcement of federal motor carrier operational regulations. They also have jurisdiction over intra-provincial carriers, also called local carriers. Data from the National Collision Database indicates that on average, 7% of all collisions in Canada between 2012 and 2021 involved a commercial motor vehicle. Yet these collisions accounted for 19% of fatalities and 10% of serious injuries. Driver fatigue is recognized in Canada and internationally as a critical risk factor associated with motor vehicle crashes. The duration of continuous wakefulness, acute sleep loss, and the cumulative sleep debt contribute significantly to fatigue-related accidents. In 1987, the federal, provincial, and territorial ministers responsible for transportation and highway safety signed a memorandum of understanding to develop and implement a national safety code. As of 2023, the National Safety Code sets out 16 safety standards for commercial vehicles, which serve as the basis for harmonized rules and regulations governing the safe operation of commercial vehicles, drivers, and motor carriers. The National Safety Code is maintained by the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators, which is made up of members from the federal and provincial and territorial governments. I am the board member representing the federal government. Transport Canada's hours of service regulations were first established in 1987 and have always been harmonized to National Safety Code Standard 9. The current rules are derived from the Commercial Motor Vehicle Driver Fatigue and Alertness Study, the largest and most comprehensive over-the-road study of fatigue ever conducted in North America, jointly conducted by the U.S. Department of Transport and Transport Canada. Proposed changes to the commercial vehicle drivers' hours of service regulations to mandate certified electronic logging devices, or ELDs, for federally regulated truck and bus motor carriers and drivers were first published on December 16, 2017 in Canada Gazette Part 1. The final amendments were published on June 12, 2019 in Canada Gazette Part 2, with a coming into force date of June 12, 2021. For the first 18 months following that date, there was no hard enforcement of this requirement in order for industry to have additional time to adapt. It was only in January 2023 that enforcement measures began to be applied. The introduction of ELDs did not alter existing limits to driver or working hours for commercial drivers, change the rest requirements, or alter the way in which time should be reported. These have remained unchanged since they were last amended in 2007. The only change was that these hours must now be tracked electronically, which means they are less susceptible to errors or deliberate falsification. Transport Canada officials have had meetings with representatives of the animal transport industry dating back to the initial publication of the proposed ELD requirements. These meetings have provided the opportunity to ensure the industry is aware of the significant flexibility that already exists in the regulations. For example, this includes an exemption for operators that work within 160 kilometers of their home terminal, the ability to defer up to 2 hours of daily off-duty time, and the ability to increase driving time by up to 2 hours in adverse driving conditions. In the event that the built-in regulatory flexibility does not meet the unique needs of a particular industry segment, motor carriers or the associations on their behalf may make an application for a regulatory exemption under Section 16 of the Motor Vehicle Transport Act. In accordance with the Act, the granting of an exception can occur when the application is found to be in the public interest and not likely to affect motor carrier safety. When an exemption is granted, it's generally very prescriptive, designed to address a specific problem, and includes terms and conditions to mitigate any fatigue risk and facilitate enforcement. Should the animal transport industry decide to pursue a Section 16 exemption, Transport Canada stands ready to work with them to determine what type of regulatory relief may be warranted. I note that the committee has heard about guidance for enforcement officers. The Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators application guide for hours of service helps to provide a common interpretation for enforcement officers, motor carriers, and drivers to facilitate consistent enforcement and compliance with the rules. The Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators, or CCMTA, is aware of the request to review the guidance as it applies to animal transport, and this topic will be discussed at an upcoming meeting of its Compliance and Regulatory Affairs Program Committee, where Transport Canada sits as a member. The committee has also heard about some comparisons with the rules in the United States. First, it's important to note that both Canada and US require hours of service to be recorded with an ELD, with some exceptions. However, Canada currently allows longer driving hours than the US, longer workdays, and more on-duty hours in a driver's 7-day cycle. With respect to the 150 air mile exemption for the agricultural sector in the US, this was a mandate of the U.S. Congress, which allows a livestock driver to work and drive unlimited hours within 150 air miles, approximately 270 kilometers, of either the origin or destination of their load. This exemption does not align with the Commercial Motor Vehicle Driver Fatigue and Alertness Study and has been identified by the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board as a potential contributing factor in at least one fatal accident. To conclude, Mr. Chair, Transport Canada is dedicated to maintaining the safety of commercial drivers and all road users that share their workplace. This is why we have developed evidence-based regulations to help ensure that commercial drivers operating in Canada drive within their limits and accurately log their working hours. We are happy to work with the animal transport sector to address any unique needs within this framework. Thank you. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vanstone. We'll now turn over to Ms. Ireland for about 5 minutes or however long you need.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here to speak with you today as you continue your consideration of electronic logging device requirements in animal transport. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency is a science-based regulatory agency and is dedicated to safeguarding animal health, plant health, food safety to enhance the health and well-being of Canadians, the environment, and the economy. In this capacity, the CFI administers and enforces a variety of legislation, including the Health of Animals Act and the Health of Animals regulations. I'd like to take a few minutes to outline the objectives of the Health of Animals regulations and the federal government's role as it pertains to the transportation of animals. The CFI, provincial and territorial governments, producers, transporters, industry organizations, and many others each have a role to play in animal welfare. The CFI regulates specifically the humane transport of animals and the humane treatment of food animals in federal abattoirs. The intent of the Canadian Humane Transport Regulations is to ensure that whoever transport animals does so without causing avoidable suffering of these animals throughout the transportation process. In February of 2019, after extensive consultation, the Government of Canada published the updated Humane Transport Regulations. As part of this consultation process, the CFI worked with Transport Canada to ensure that these regulations do not conflict with the Commercial Vehicle Drivers' Hours of Service regulations. The updated Humane Transport Regulations prescribe maximum intervals for the time between withdrawing feed and water, loading the animals, to stopping once again to provide access to feed, water, and rest. For example, for very young and compromised animals, the interval is up to 12 hours. For pigs and horses, it is up to 28 hours, and for cattle, up to 36 hours. These provisions exist to protect animals from dehydration, exhaustion, and a nutritional deficit associated with long hauls. As these new regulations came into force in February of 2020, the industry asked for time in order to establish best practices and make investments to enhance the number of feed, water, and rest access locations across Canada. The CFI worked extensively with industry and granted a period of 2 years in implementation of the requirements specifically related to feed, water, and rest times. Humane animal transportation is complex and it is dynamic, and things can go wrong. Responding appropriately to an evolving situation requires knowledge, skill, and planning ahead. That is why, as part of the updated regulations, livestock transporters are required to have contingency plans that establish measures to reduce or mitigate suffering if unforeseen delays or circumstances occur. CFI supports industry by providing guidance and tools to help regulated parties understand and implement the updated regulations. This includes practical tools such as a contingency plan template that industry can adapt and use. The CFI is aware that you can't plan for every possible scenario, and that is why guidance to industry also states that when rare circumstances occur, inspectors may use discretion in enforcing the feed, water, and rest times as long as it was an unforeseen situation, actions were considered reasonable, animals were monitored, and measures taken to avoid suffering. The CFI employs highly skilled veterinarians, veterinary inspectors, and other inspectors who administer and enforce the humane transport regulations. They understand that flexibility may be needed at times. The CFI has also issued guidance and training, and they have it in place to ensure consistent inspector discretion regarding feed, water, and rest time intervals to address cases that are infrequent occurrences and due to unforeseen circumstances out of the regulated party's control. This includes situations such as a breakdown of the conveyance, a traffic accident, an unexpected road closure when no other options for stopping are available, and unforeseen weather events. In these circumstances, the regulated party would need to demonstrate that decisions were made in the best interest of the animals and animal welfare. The CFI monitors compliance with the regulations by conducting routine inspections at strategic locations, including points of entry into Canada, at federal and provincial abattoirs, assembly centres, and roadside blitzes, as well as following up on reports of non-compliance as needed. Mr. Chair, I hope this provides a general overview of CFI's role in humane animal transport, and I welcome any questions the committee may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ireland. It did provide a helpful overview, and we'll get right to questions. So we're going to start with Mr. Steinle for up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just so that people at home that are watching this morning know what we are asking in this motion, in this study, it's not about changing the amount of time an animal is on a trailer. That's not what this is about, because we realize the safety of animals is paramount to everyone, and I think we all realize that at this committee, because the 12 hours, 24 hours, 28 hours, 38 hours, those are not the issues within the industry right now. What is causing some issues is the electronic logging devices, and we learned last committee meeting that once the truck starts going six to 8 miles per hour, that logging device turns on. And some of the unforeseen things happen is during the fall calf run, truck drivers are sitting at stockyards for longer times, and that time is added to their ELDs. And what we heard from the Transport Alliance is that just through the guidelines and through the enforcement, which is done provincially, thank you, Ms. Vanstone, I realize that, is just a little bit more certainty. When we have a lot of conversation around agriculture, they want a little bit more certainty. So when we're talking about Section 76, they're just asking if the consideration of going over that time could be added into Section 76 of the guiding principles, so that if an unforeseen situation happens and a driver goes over their time to get their animals to that destination, if they got stopped, if that could be taken into consideration and adding that certainty into that section. Ms. Vanstone, could you comment on that, please?
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to comment on that. So first of all, I would note that guidance is developed collaboratively through the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators with the federal government and provincial and territorial government. So we have brought to the attention of the Compliance and Review Committee, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that the animal transport industry is interested in having a review of the guidance as it pertains to their unique needs. So that will be happening. There will be discussions happening, and again, it's not specifically within the control of Transport Canada to make changes to the guidance. That said, it's very important to distinguish between foreseeable and unforeseeable circumstances. So the Section 76 is really very focused on adverse circumstances that arise that are not foreseeable. I think what I would say is loading and unloading. This would be an area where there should be contingencies built in for typical types
we've had
delays.
some groups here, and I'm not going to put the livestock system on trial because they are very well logistically. They work it out quite and they have built-in delays in that already. So I'm not going to debate that with you because the systems that they have in place are quite good logistically. Lots of these companies really do have the time built in for unloading and loading, and that was one example. But accidents on the roads, delays when you're crossing the borders, things like that, those things do happen, and they build that in. So I think the system is trying to be worked as well as it can be, but there are unforeseen circumstances. I noticed in April 2022 that the Minister of Transport exempted truck drivers from transporting fertilizer products between the provinces of Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan during spring planting. So I'm just wondering if they get exemptions for things like that, and fertilizer can stay on the truck a bit longer than animals, and animals are a bit more, obviously the transporting animals is more difficult than fertilizer. So I was wondering, how did that exemption come into play? Is it just because of the certain situations? Obviously, fertilizer maybe it was harder to get then, and is that something that we could look for? Is that unforeseen circumstances, and is that something that we could look for towards something like the livestock industry?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to answer that. The exemption for the fertilizer industry is one of the exemptions under Section 16 of the Motor Vehicle Transport Act. The industry applied to Transport Canada with a detailed application regarding their unique needs for regulatory relief. They would have provided us with information to be able to assess the impacts of that exemption and to ensure that it was in the interest of the public interest and not affecting motor carrier safety.
So I ran out of time. So with that exemption, could drivers go over a little bit of their hours of service?
I'm sorry, I would have to review the exemption to remind myself of the details. The details of the exemption would be set out. I do have the sort of high level
You can bring
summary.
that back to the committee if you could. That'd be great.
I'll be happy to send the information on all of our Section 16 exemptions to the committee.
I was just wondering, does the minister make the final decision on if, with the guidance of transportation, if there could be an addition to Section 76.1, or is that done by the committee you talked about, or does the minister have final sign-off on that?
So Section 76 is part of the regulations. So any changes to Section 76 would need to go through a regulatory process. So, there's a proposal made to Treasury Board. It's published in Canada Gazette. There's comments. So the guidance has to be consistent with Section 76 and what the parameters are that are set out in that.
But would the minister have final sign-off and have to sign off on it?
The guidance or the regulations? The guidance is developed by the federal and provincial and territorial governments working through the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators. So it would be that body that would finalize the guidance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steinley. Thank you, Ms. Vanstone. Mr. McDonald, over to you for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to, I want to go to CFIA for a second, and I just want to know on Section 16, has there been asks since 2020 for exemptions when these new regulations were put in place, or?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I just need a little bit more clarity from the member.
So you talked a little bit about Section 16 and exemptions, and was it you? Sorry. And I was just wondering, has there been any exemptions since 2020?
Thank you. I appreciate the question, Mr. Chair. Yes, there have been a number of exemptions since 2020. There was the exemption mentioned for the fertilizer industry. We have an exemption related to the oil and gas industry. Yeah.
Has there been any exemptions for livestock?
No. So the exemptions are done on the basis of an application to Transport Canada by the industry. We have had a number of conversations with the animal transport industry to advise them of how that process works and welcome them to submit an application to Transport Canada based on the requirements of the exemption, and we have not received an application to date.
And I'm just wondering, and I'll go to CFIA this time, but I'm just wondering, how closely related do you work with Transport Canada on these exemptions? Has there been any communication or coordination between the two departments to ensure that it's consistent?
Yeah, thank you very much. So in the development of our own humane transport regulations, we did consult with Transport Canada to make sure that our humane transport regulations and their regulations do in fact work together, and they do. When this issue was brought up by industry, we certainly did engage with Transport Canada, and we have been present at the discussions with industry because I think we bring an important perspective, not only with our experience with live animal transport, but also in terms of how we've clarified the rules for the same group of stakeholders in our journey and implementation of our regulations, amended regulations. So we are engaged with Transport. Our organizations are in discussion about this issue, but Transport Canada has a rule around public safety and driver safety, and that is their area of expertise and regulatory oversight, and ours is around animal safety. And they are not mutually exclusive. These rules have to work together, and we have to consider the spectrum of animal safety and welfare, as well as driver and public safety and welfare. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, through transportation, has there been any technological advancements or solutions on and this could be CFIA as well, on the animal welfare? So has there been any advancements in monitoring the livestock during transportation that may alleviate some of these pressures, or the exemptions or what have you, that may cause concern for CFIA? I guess there's a two-part there.
I'm not aware. It's not an area that Transport Canada would monitor explicitly in terms of the load that's being carried. We do have responsibilities when it comes to dangerous goods at Transport Canada, but not with respect to live animals.
Ms. Ireland, do you have any comment?
Yeah, thank you very much. So everybody or anyone who transports animals is required to ensure their safety and welfare. And the regulations are a combination of prescriptive and outcome-based, so that the transporters are required to monitor their load, make sure the animals are doing well in the trailers, and when they onload and offload, that their safety and welfare is first and top of mind.
So I'm wondering also, too, on the provincial government's part, what issues have they raised? Are they similar to the issues that this committee has raised, or are they quite different regionally? And I can speak from living in Prince Edward Island and hauling hogs to the former Olimar plant in Quebec. That has now changed, and that has changed since 2020. So I'm wondering, what will the procedure be for those farmers if they have to go and exceed basically the requirements that were in place prior to Olimar closing?
Thank you for the question. So I would start by noting that all provinces and territories through the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators work on developing and continuing to update the National Safety Code. And those are safety standards that apply to the commercial vehicle sector. And those are intended to ensure that both the federal regulations and provincial regulations for intra-provincial carriers are harmonized. There are differences in the regime. There are provinces within their sphere of regulatory responsibility may provide different rules and exceptions within the boundaries of their jurisdiction. So that does exist. But when it comes to application of the federal regulations, we work closely with our provincial and territorial counterparts to develop things like the enforcement guidance, as I mentioned before. I'm not aware. I think that there's general understanding that we adhere to Standard 9 of the National Safety Code, and there's no objection from our provincial territorial colleagues, considering that code is developed collaboratively through a federal, provincial, territorial process, that we adhere to Standard 9 of the National Safety Code. And I would also note that within the...
Unfortunately, we're at time. Mr. McDonald might have another chance, or his colleague, Mr. Lewis. Maintenant, nous avons Monsieur Parent, 6 minutes. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Perron, for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Your presence is appreciated. I'll start with Ms. Vanstone. The witnesses we saw previously from the industry, especially cattle carriers, have mentioned the following thing. You've spoken about Clause 67 that could be modified. Its modification might be a little bit heavy and long. You talked about the process, the Canadian Gazette, and so on. How much time are we talking about? How much time would it take to modify Clause 67?
So typically a regulatory process would unfold over a few years. So there's typically what we call pre-regulatory consultations to ensure, even before we publish a proposed regulatory amendment in Canada Gazette 1, that we've done outreach to the industry and to any other relevant stakeholders. Then there's a publication of a proposed regulation in Canada Gazette 1 with a comment period. It might take, say, up to a year or two from pre-regulatory consultation, then typically another year before you would review comments and do the final publication in Canada Gazette 2. So typically 2-3 years is a full process.
Okay, donc c'est très, très long.
So it's quite long. The witnesses that came previously said that something that might might fix the issue is to have some sort of regulatory change. You already talked about it with the members who asked you questions earlier. Do you think that that's doable in a shorter amount of time, and do you think that that would be a good fix? Previous witnesses said that the department said that what they wanted was already included, but they said that the clause was quite vague and they don't want it to be up for interpretation. An inspector might not be as flexible as another one, and the fines might be a little bit random, so they want to clarify the clause. Do you think that that's possible, and how much time do you think that would take?
So with respect to any changes to the guidance itself, that's a more, I would say, straightforward process in some regard, but it is important that the guidance still has to be consistent with the intent of the regulations themselves. So the guidance could not surpass the parameters set out in the regulations. It would be difficult to say. We would probably, because it's developed through the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators, there is a need to work towards consensus. So it's difficult to estimate what kind of information and how much time that might take, but it is not as administratively complicated as making a change to the regulations itself.
OK. Donc, advenant l'éventualité où le consensus est...
If there was a consensus reached quickly, it would still take a few months, correct?
At minimum, I would believe it would take at least a few months, yes.
OK, parfait. Donc, c'est plus encourageant.
Okay, good. That's more encouraging to hear because some of the delays are quite long. Another question for you. I don't want to nitpick, but one of the associations told us that they shared their concerns with regards to the necessary flexibility. They said that your department said that Transport Canada did not concern itself with, or rather, it was not part of the Transport Canada's mandate to take care of animal welfare. I know that it's not you personally who gave that answer, but is that something that you find concerning? That was the answer that they got? It seemed a little bit flippant, or how should have Transport Canada reacted? Maybe they should have contacted the CFIA, for example.
Thank you for the question. I think the intent of the answer is to say that the work that we do at Transport Canada is derived from our legislative and regulatory authorities, which are focused on road safety and commercial vehicle safety. We're not mandated to put in place regulations or rules with respect to animal welfare and safety. I think that is what the intention of that response is. We have included CFIA in our conversations with the industry to ensure that those perspectives can come together as part of those conversations.
Donc, Madame Ireland, pour compléter...
Ms. Ireland, if you have anything to add, so you work with Transport Canada to change the interpretation of Clause 67. Do you think that that could happen quickly, and do you think that the communication should be rather smooth if this happens?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So, as my Transport Canada colleague has said, we have regulatory frameworks. Mine pertains to avoidable animal suffering as it relates to animal transport, and hers relates to public safety and driver safety. And as I've said, these are both areas of requirements that are needed. These two regulatory frameworks work together, and ourselves and Transport Canada do work together, particularly on an issue that intersects like this one. We have been in discussion with Transport Canada, we have listened to industry, and we have come together, all of us, to have several discussions about this issue. CFIA remains available to continue to work with Transport Canada, with industry, to find solutions to issues as it relates to animal transport.
Thank you very much to you both. We'll now go to Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both of you for helping guide this committee through a pretty narrow focus. Dr. Ireland, I'd like to start with you. So we have previously heard from witnesses about, with livestock trailers, there's a certain requirement that a minimum amount of airflow is required. So, when you look at the hours that certain livestock are allowed to be loaded onto a vehicle, I guess what previous witnesses have told us is that, you can't just have those trailers stationary because, the ventilation systems won't work properly. And I guess some witnesses were concerned that that requirement for airflow may require a driver to be put into an uncomfortable situation. How do your inspectors generally monitor the airflow requirements in trailers for livestock?
Yeah, thanks very much. So just to give you an example, the feedwater rest interval for cattle able to eat exclusively hay and grain would be 36 hours. So from taking food and water away, transporting, and providing them feed, water, rest for a more mature cow, beef cow, for example, would be 36 hours. So transports have different ways of ventilation. Some are open-sided with slats. Some will have probably not as many fans or abilities to mist and cool animals. And yes, on a hot and humid day, I would be concerned without a tractor or a trailer moving because the ventilation for some of the species would be important. On cooler days, there are other ways to manage ventilation. The requirement in the regulations is really that animals have proper airflow, they maintain their proper temperature, and for transports there is at times ability to stop, but it depends on the weather and a number of circumstances. And that is why we have given CFIA inspectors interpretive guidance so that they can use their enforcement discretion with respect to the requirements for these feedwater rest times. And so when unforeseen circumstances occur and a truck operator has demonstrated that decisions were made in the best interest of animals, this guidance that we have provided and training to inspectors, which industry has been involved with and is aware of, allows them to use some criteria, like is the incident an infrequent occurrence? Is it due to an unforeseen circumstance? Is it reasonable under the circumstance? Were the animals suffering and were the animals monitored? So our inspectors use judgment and they look at the situation in its totality and determine whether enforcement and compliance action is required or whether some discretion is merited.
Okay, thank you for that. Ms. Vanstone, you've heard the testimony from members of the industry at our previous meeting. Where do you think the disconnect is between the regulators and the industry here? Because they seem to be unhappy with the current situation. Some are saying that it's as simple as interpreting Section 76 on what an emergency is. You're saying the preferred route should be, something made under Section 16 of the Act. Do you want to just weigh in on where you think the disconnect is here?
I think we've had some very good conversations with the industry. I would start by saying that, and we continue to be open. We just met with them a few weeks ago was our last conversation. So we are very committed to continuing the dialogue. I think there are two different processes that we're speaking about. Changes to the guidance have to be within the parameters of the regulations themselves, which are quite clear that Section 76 talks about adverse conditions and unforeseen circumstances. And carrying, the fact that you're carrying livestock or the fact that there may be a delay at the border, some of these things to some extent are foreseeable, that there are typically a certain type of delay at different points, and these should be included in contingency planning. I think we are happy, and I think my colleagues, provincial and territorial colleagues, would be happy to talk to the industry about other types of scenarios that may be applicable in terms of clarifying the guidance. But it can only go so far. If there are other unique needs that go beyond what could be accommodated through clarifications to guidance, then that is where a Section 16 exemption process may be more appropriate to respond to the unique needs of the sector. And we have invited the sector to submit an application if they feel that would be a more appropriate way to address their unique needs.
Thank you. And you've mentioned that you've been having conversations with the industry. Do you think the fact that a standing committee of the House of Commons is now looking into this issue is helping move those conversations along to a conclusion?
I think we've been having excellent conversations with the industry. I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chair, to come and speak today about that and about the regulatory framework that we have implemented and administer. And I look forward to hearing the recommendations from the committee.
Thank you. I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. We'll turn now back to the Conservatives. Is it Mr. Barlow for 5 minutes? Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to take a minute of my time here to put a notice of motion on the table that we can discuss later, but I just want to get it on record for our next study on the grocery CEOs and the ministers. You have been given a copy of the motion, so I'm just going to read it into the record and we can discuss it later. But I think it's important that we include some of the documents from the ministers. So my motion reads as follows, that given the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry's broken promise to come up with a plan to lower food prices for Canadians by Thanksgiving, and the correspondence distributed to the Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food on October 10th, 2023 from the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry and the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, requesting the reopening of hearings into Canada's high grocery prices, that the committee order the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, and the Minister of Finance to table by December 1st, 2023, all records including briefing notes, analysis, and emails on plans to lower grocery prices, and to request they appear before the committee to explain how their plan to lower food prices in Canada. So that will be a motion that I will move at a later time. Mr. Chair, I just want to get that on the record. Now to the witnesses, and thank you both for being here. We do appreciate your expertise. Now, Ms. Vanstone, you say you're having great conversations with industry, but we have, this has been going on since 2017. I think the time for conversations has long passed. I guess I'm a little frustrated with a pretty unanimous position or concerns raised by industry and different aspects of the industry. We've sent a letter to the Minister of Transportation almost a year ago asking for some changes to be made. We weren't even given a response, let alone any changes to address some of these concerns. So I think the solution here is pretty clear. I'm just wondering, Ms. Vanstone, has the Minister of Transportation ever given you or your department any direction to try and resolve this situation and come up with maybe an interim policy while changes to Section 16 are worked through? Has any direction been given to you by the Minister?
With respect to the conversations and the work we've done with the industry, we continue to look at the existing flexibility and the existing exemption process within the Act, and we believe that there is a significant amount of room to work with the industry within the existing framework.
Okay, so then if you agree with that, then what is the holdup to adding some clarity to what seems to be some either inconsistent, maybe not inconsistencies, but some objectiveness within the guidelines? What is the holdup that you aren't able to come up with a policy or strengthen this policy or have a little bit more clarity in this policy to address the concerns that have been raised?
Thanks for the question. As I mentioned previously, the questions with respect to the enforcement guidance have been referred to the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators, which is responsible collectively, Transport Canada working with our provincial territorial colleagues to look at that guidance.
We had some officials or some representatives here at a previous meeting, and they, Humane Canada, World Animal Protection, and they described our animal transportation industry as littered with systemic issues, poorly organized, a limited inspection regime from CFIA. Would you agree with those sentiments that there aren't any logistics or planning that goes into this and it's very poorly managed? Would you agree with those comments?
I would simply say that I believe the regulatory regime provides significant room and flexibility for all commercial motor vehicle operators and drivers to plan accordingly and to be able to drive safely within the context of the hours of service rules.
One last question really quickly. You mentioned that we are in alignment with, or we're trying to kind of get more of an alignment with the United States, and the United States has that exemption. And you said, well, there was one accident, a fatality. How do you know how far past their hours of work or distance was involved? And I understand what we're trying to do here, but I'd say, we're never going to have zero accidents. And if we've made a change that works in the United States, or they've made a change that works and they've had one accident, that is unfortunate, but it's one accident. We're never going to have zero. So could you have some details on what happened in that accident?
Yes, I would clarify that one accident that was investigated by the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board. We don't have statistics on all potential accidents that may be associated, but this was a situation where a driver, the investigation found the driver had less than a 6-hour opportunity for sleep the day of the crash and regularly worked 78 to 80 hours per week. And when they're within the exempted 150 air mile radius, they can work essentially, there's no regulation, no hours of service requirements at all under that exemption. So essentially a driver who's staying within that radius could would not have a limit other than what their employer.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Van Zoon. Thank you, Mr. Barlow. We'll go to Mr. Lewis for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Appreciate the time, and all questions will be through you. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. I think it's important to have this conversation, and you bring good perspectives. We all want to make sure that our drivers are safe. We want to ensure that people on our roads are safe to minimize accidents. And we want to make sure that animals are treated safely. So I really appreciate both of you being here. Maybe I'd start where the last person left off, Ms. Vanstone, the Director General of Multimodal and Road Safety Program. There have been requests to harmonize Canada's laws with the U.S., and the U.S. has that exemption, which you said the U.S. Livestock trucker can drive unlimited hours within the 150-mile radius. You mentioned concerns about that. I've spoken to livestock trucking companies who admitted that that could be problematic. In your opinion, what effects could that have on public road safety, on our own, for our truckers and for people on the roads?
Right. Our primary concern from Transport Canada is ensuring the safety of our roads, and one of the key ways we do that is to mitigate the risk of accidents related to fatigue, and that is the entire purpose of the hours of service rules and regulations. A very large exemption of this nature would allow for a significant increase in the risk of fatigue if drivers are able to consistently exceed what we think are regular limits and not get the rest that they need to be able to get over fatigue.
So do you think that term unlimited hours could be a bit extreme?
It's not consistent with the science and the evidence of what is required to maintain safety from a fatigue perspective.
Oh, thank you. In the United States, they started, I think it was 2017, they started to operate with ELDs. Have you heard of the frequency, how often livestock truckers would need to drive beyond that hour of service? Do we have any data?
I'm afraid I do not have any data available to me right now with respect to the U.S. situation.
Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned provincial authorities enforce the hours of service. How is the enforcement affected commercial drivers handling livestock? Do we have data on how often truckers can find themselves in this situation? And do we know what type of training that law enforcement agencies get to look at? You talked about severity of the animals in the care.
So I do not have any data that's held by the provincial and territorial enforcement authorities. I don't have any data at this point specifically with respect to ELD and animal transport. We do work, again, through the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators to help work on consistent training and guidance material for those enforcement officers.
Then thank you for that. I appreciate that. Maybe this would be a good time to pivot to Dr. Ireland from the CFIA. Your job is regulating humane transport and treatment of animals. You mentioned a contingency plan template that livestock transporters need to have contingency plans. Can you tell us what type of measures are included in this template?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't have the template in front of me. I will say that we have worked extensively with the different associations on all elements of the regulations and implementation. And so we have provided many tools, including a contingency plan template, to help them understand what things they should think about. But really, they need to think about what will they do if their truck breaks down? What will happen if the weather changes? What will happen if there's a road closure? What happens if there's delays at the border? So these contingency plans are really thinking about the what ifs so that they can continue to care and provide care for the animals in their possession and in their trailers. So it's just one tool of many, in fact, that we've developed with industry over many years to help them come into compliance with the regulation and understand best practices and really facilitate what we're all trying to achieve, which is to really prevent unnecessary suffering or avoidable suffering for animals in everyone's care.
just a few seconds left, and I appreciate this. But I was going to ask if you saw patterns of people that are using that, seeking that guidance, frequency, severity. Can you just kind of, again, in the last few seconds, put some of those categories where the subjectivity could be at play there? The unforeseen circumstances, what kind of things they were, if you can expand on that.
Sure. The unforeseen circumstances would be weather conditions, inclement weather, a storm, a road that is closed, an issue with the driver, a medical condition. So there are a number of factors that our inspectors would consider if someone was found to have gone over the feedwater rest time. So if you're a trucker, you have beef cattle, you should have offered the animals feed, water, and rest after 36 hours. If it is 42, the CFI inspectors would ask questions. Why did it go over the 36 hours? What were the circumstances? And they would use their discretion to determine whether the outcomes, what was the severity of the outcomes? Were the animals in good shape coming off the trailer? Is this a consistent pattern that this particular trucker was seen to have done? He always or she always went over 40 hours. So there are a number of factors that our inspectors look at, and they use judgment, because we all understand that things can happen and things can go wrong with transportation of animals.
Thank you, Dr. Ireland. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Maintenant, Monsieur Parent, 2 minutes 30 seconds.
Mr. Perron for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much to the witnesses once again. I'm going to use my time to table the motion that I had presented on September 15th. I don't want to disrespect the witnesses who came here today, so I won't ask that we debate the motion. I just want to table it. I want to be respectful of our witnesses, but it is important to speak about it publicly, the motion that is, because there are people in the agricultural sector who are in distress and who have been asking for help for a very long time, since July, especially for fruit and vegetable producers. Something will be happening at this very committee to help them, and I want to announce it today. So, pursuant to Standing Order 108, that the Standing Committee study the insurance and federal programs that are suffering. The interpreter will repeat that in accordance with Standing Order 108, the Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food undertake a study on insurance programs and federal assistance granted to the horticultural sector, which is more directly affected by climate hazards. That as part of the study, the committee address the effectiveness of insurance programs and the one-time assistance granted, as well as possible solutions to be developed for greater climate resilience, such as climate adaptation measures and programs to better support the horticultural sector in dealing with climate change. That the committee devote at least 6 meetings to this study, that the committee hear from witnesses on this issue, that it report its observation and recommendations to the House, and that in accordance with Standing Order 109, the committee request that the government table a comprehensive response to the report. We can discuss this in camera. I think that we can discuss this with provinces and territories, especially Quebec, but especially with the federal government. We have to take care of our sector, the agricultural sector, and this has to do with our food resiliency and basic respect for the people who have been feeding us. It's been 2.5 minutes. I'm very sorry to our witnesses for not asking you any questions, but you understand. Thank you, Mr. Perron, and we will have time after this panel to talk about committee affairs, so that is something to take into consideration for us. Now, Mr. McGregor, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question to Transport Canada, like when two sides are negotiating, they both have their starting positions in the matter. I guess from the regulator's position, do you feel that the industry needs to do more because it comes down to foreseen and unforeseen circumstances. And this committee has looked at Canada's processing capacity. We know that it's dominated by just 2 corporate entities. We've seen a lot of plants shut down. So the industry has become more concentrated. We've lost a lot of capacity in small rural communities with often devastating economic results. Do the regulators feel that the industry needs to step up a little bit more in some of these areas? Is that a starting position?
I wouldn't take thank you for the question. I don't think it's within the mandate of Transport Canada to take a position on the industry decisions. Our focus is very much on protecting road safety and ensuring, particularly in the context of fatigue, that drivers are driving safely on our roads for their own safety and the safety of the traveling public.
Okay, I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so we are going to go to kind of our final round, so to speak. We'll turn it over to the Conservatives.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate my NDP colleagues' questions, as I have Cargill meat processors literally in my backyard, so I understand how much truck traffic goes by my place. And certainly I would love to see additional processing capacity in Canada, but we need to worry about interprovincial trade barriers to get that done too. So it's a good topic for discussion, certainly. I guess to CFIA, Dr. Ireland, you mentioned it briefly in one of your answers, but I wanted to kind of get you to expound on that a little bit. Is one of the criticisms, I guess, or one of the interesting comments in previous witnesses was that, the livestock transportation industry just needs to plan better. When you see, Highway 1 near Thunder Bay, for example, where they go to the barn as one of the main hubs. The Trans-Canada Highway is a 1-lane highway, no shoulders. Certainly the weather in that area can be unpredictable and unforeseeable, let's say. How is it more impactful or more harmful for cattle if you are unloading and unloading? It's better. Is it better for their health to keep them on the truck than having to unload and load multiple times?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the question. So we developed the humane transport regulations based on the best available science, and really an incredible amount of literature and information and evidence. And we determined the feedwater rest prescriptive times in regulation, as I mentioned, for older beef cattle to be 36 hours, for pigs 28 hours, for young ruminants 12 hours. We based those times on information and science around animal health and welfare. And so what we are saying with these regulations is that feed, water, and rest must be given after that length of time. And transporters need to plan around that. And so there are some, and arguably not enough, their infrastructure locations like the barn where animals can be offloaded and allowed to rest and reloaded and taken to the rest of their end location. And so the industry needs to plan. You're correct. And I think the livestock transport sector has got one of the most complex planning and logistics for animals because of the multiple regulatory frameworks and the long distances that they need to take animals. But those times and then the ability to offload and rest and reload are there for animal welfare so that we don't have nutritional deficits, we don't have exhausted animals, and we have animals coming off the trucks and going into our food system in good shape.
Thanks, Dr. Allen. Just one last quick question. How many other infrastructure facilities like the barn are there in Canada where there is a designated facility to load and unload animals?
Yeah, thanks. I have some indication here in my notes of the locations, but we can provide
Sure,
more
if you wouldn't mind
after.
tabling that with the committee, that'd be great.
But we do know there's one in Thunder Bay, Mr. Chair, called the Barn in central Canada, another location in Hearst, Holleberg area. And those are privately run, owned and operated facilities that offer a location for animals to rest before they carry on for their trip.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Ms. Vanstone. In 1976, there's 400 facilities, slaughter facilities across Canada. And now in 2015, there's 30. when you were talking about the sleeve exemption that is currently in place in the United States of 150 miles, and you said a lot of people could take advantage of that. Most of the people I've talked to in the trucking industry that haul livestock, they go much, much further than 150 miles. So the three of the biggest facilities they go to would be Cargo in Guelph, Winnipeg, JBS, and Harmony in Calgary. So to think that there'd be a lot of people taking advantage of the 150 miles from departure and to destination, which with our current infrastructure in the livestock industry, I think would be a bit of an exaggeration. Could you say, did Transport Canada take into consideration when we looked at the guiding principles in Section 761 that the facilities have gone down from 400 to 30?
So our regulations are agnostic to the load that is being carried, and that is why, as I've mentioned, there is a possibility through Section 16 of the Act for us to be able to work with industries that have unique needs, rather than building that into the regulations themselves. So that, yeah.
No, thank you. And Mr. Chair, I think that gets to the heart of the problem. You shouldn't be agnostic. I think there's a big difference between hauling diapers and hauling livestock. And sometimes you have to make those decisions as a truck driver, and that's a lot of stress that is put on the truck drivers, is trying to make that decision of, do I push it a little bit and get to my final destination to make sure that it is in the best interest of the cattle? And if I do that, will the law enforcement officer, because we're not talking about adjusting the hours of transportation for the animals. We're talking about the drivers. Let's make that clear. And that's the issue that they face.
Thank you, Mr. Steinle. Colleagues, I'm going to take a round here, and I appreciate my Liberal colleagues permitting me that opportunity. I want to ask about Section 16. So this is an exemption, Ms. Vanstone, that you've talked about. The industry was very clear that they are not necessarily seeking an exemption. They're looking for further policy guidance to individuals who are actually on compliance to ensure that there is some understanding that there can be situations beyond the 13 hours where it might be actually more favorable to finish the actual trip to maintain the security of the load. And they were trying to make sure that the maintaining of security of the load applied in an agriculture and a livestock context. But one of the things that was very apparent to me during the meeting was that Transport Canada was asking for statistics and information to actually round out the exemption. You mentioned to this committee, Ms. Vanstone, that you don't actually have the data yourself. I know you're a member through Transport Canada that sits on the CCTMA. If you don't have that information, how will we expect industry to necessarily gather? What do you envision industry actually doing to help justify the Section 16 exemption if that was the direction they wanted to go?
So some of the information, I appreciate the question. Some of the information that we have requested would be understanding the typical routes, what the typical route planning looks like, the time required, where feeding locations are located. So that's some of the kind of information that we have requested from industry. And with respect to the and enforcement information itself, certainly individual provincial and territorial jurisdictions would gather enforcement information within their own jurisdiction that they could bring to bear at CCMTA discussions.
What is the current policy guidance for, I'll say, enforcement? You mentioned it's provincial. What does that actually look like? Is that, like, what agency provincially, let's say in Saskatchewan, let's say Alberta, who actually enforces this when truck drivers, I guess it would be the provincial truck folks under the that department. Do you have can you get information to this committee about how often that there is violations in that space? Because not even violations, there's a requirement under the regulations that if you had to actually go above and beyond the 13 hours under the definition of 76 in the regulations for the benefit and the security of the load or the safety of the occupant of the vehicle, that you at least have to record that. But you don't have that information. Is that something you could get to this committee, or is that something this committee, I guess, could request of the CCTMA or MTA? Sorry.
I don't have the information. It would be held by provincial and territorial enforcement agencies. So that would typically either be a sort of transportation ministry enforcement group, or potentially law. In some situations, it might be a law enforcement, police, RCMP, who may have interacted with a driver. As the way the data would be collected at this point in time as an hours of service violation. So I don't know that the data would necessarily distinguish. But there's a requirement to have an ELD, but then the ELD is just simply the way that those hours are recorded. So we would see it recorded as hours of service violations. And I'm also not sure if the data distinguishes the type of transport entity.
What guidance is given? So you mentioned, let's say it's an Alberta individual, an inspector working under the Department of Transportation, for example. They meet a truck driver who's 100 kilometers away from finishing the destination, who's at 12 hours and 55 minutes. How does an officer, like, what guidance are they given there in the discretion? Now, let's say Miss Ireland talked about unforeseen circumstances, weather. I think those are very clear where those could be done. But industry standards can adjust as well, right? Let's say on average someone goes to pick up calves at a certain feedlot, and normally it takes an hour. But for whatever reason in this particular process within the industry, it took 3 hours. I didn't hear that as being an unforeseen circumstance. So how would the officers actually handle that? Because what I thought was pretty compelling testimony last week was there's just a desire to want to make sure that drivers are not put in a situation where they could be potentially violating the rules, but they're within 75 kilometers, 100 kilometers of finishing their trip. So what guidance are those officers given in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, whatever the case may be?
All enforcement officers should have access to the Canadian Council of Motor Transport Administrators application guide for enforcement. There is within that I can provide the committee with a copy of that guide. There is a section that refers to the section 76 in terms of emergencies and adverse driving conditions. So there is guidance. I don't want to take the time of the committee to sort of read through all the details. So that is consistent. That guide is provided for enforcement officers across the country. And again, the enforcement officers, as they do with animal transport, with the CFIA regulations, obviously enforcement officers have a certain amount of discretion to ask a driver questions and determine within an individual case what the appropriate enforcement action would be.
Ms. Ireland, you heard me provide the example. The truck driver, let's say, picked up cattle, was moving them on a distance, let's say was about 10 hours in terms of the distance between the feedlot and the processing facility, or whatever the case may be. They're 75 kilometers away. They're at about 12 hours, 55 minutes under their ELD time. They could, the definition allows security of the load. So the truck driver's sitting there saying, okay, I think it's important. We want to be able to finish this trip. There is not a rest station that you've referenced in either Thunder Bay or Hearst. They're out in Western Canada. From a animal health perspective, does it make sense to necessarily stop for the required rest time and keep animals on a trailer, or would it be more beneficial to the animal health to actually finish the load in that time? So, because that's one part of the nuance here is trying to understand if it's 30 degrees and it's a hot summer's day and the truck has to pull over for a certain period of rest, 8 hours, I'm being referenced, it may or may not, I don't know the specifics. That doesn't sound like that could be very beneficial to the animals. So how do we, what advice as a veterinarian would you be giving in that situation?
The flexibilities that we show at CFI under the Humane Transport Regulations really focus around unforeseen circumstances. So a driver will understand where they are and where they're going to, the number of hours, where the rest stations might be. And so they need to plan around those elements. And I would say that transporting livestock, and I guess this will be saying again, is really complex because we have the animal welfare and the public safety and the driver safety at play. And the coordination and the communication is essential for these requirements. Now, if you ask me about pulling over on a hot, humid day, that is not optimal because, as I've mentioned, airflow is needed. There are other ways that a truck can cool. But certainly weather would be one element for us under the Humane Transport Regulations, inclement weather, snowstorm, that we might look at, or inspectors might look at, to determine whether, if they went over their feedwater rest time, whether that was warranted. And we would look at the other factors that I mentioned, like was it really unforeseen or could it have been better planned? So
Ms. Ireland, I appreciate it. I'm not contemplating a situation where it would be over the feed rest time. I'm contemplating a situation where the ELDs come into play. And then, and I appreciate your answer because what you said is if it's particularly in certain circumstances, as opposed to keeping the animals on the trailer that could be a situation where animal health is maybe not optimal, were your words. The final question that I want to ask is how do we find a pathway forward here, in your view? And maybe this is to Ms. Vanstone, because look, as a parliamentarian, we are engaged by industry and different groups all the time. That's our work, regardless if it's agriculture or another industry. I actually found the testimony from the industry relatively compelling because they're not necessarily seeking a Section 16 exemption. They're not asking for a regulatory or legislative change. They're asking what I found to either be a policy statement or further guidance specific to those situations that I just illustrated to you. So, but the transport does not seem willing to want to go down that path. I've received letters from this before Christmas. So that would have been in 2022. We're almost on a year now. You mentioned that the CCTMA has not really necessarily convened to provide that When is that going to happen? And how can we get the Department of Transportation federally to start actually kind of driving that conversation at that convening level to provide this guidance? Because I do think it's important to be able to make sure that there is some certainty in there. I take notice that you say it already exists, but the industry feel it doesn't. And so we have an issue that I think has become very technical, but that we do want to try to get a resolution for the benefit of those in the industry, and I think those that are, of course, on your side, trying to make sure that there is certainty in the regulations.
For the question, I hope you don't mind. I would just want to begin by ensuring clarity on the fact that the electronic logging devices did not change anything with respect to the requirements of hours of service and how they should be recorded. They simply made sure that drivers would be recording those hours accurately. Hours of service have not changed since 2007, and the industry, when they're using a paper log, should have been recording. The expectation is they would have been recorded the same way. The CCMTA program committee meetings are happening next week. We do expect this discussion will happen at those meetings. And again, the scope to look at the guidance is still within the parameters of the regulation itself. So that would be the context of that discussion.
So just to be clear then, that as under Section 76 right now of the regulations, where there is provision for maintaining the security of the load, that would extend to situations where animal welfare for unforeseen circumstances would be in jeopardy. Drivers who are in a situation of an unforeseen circumstance, which is not defined, although I take notice that there is some definition or some certainly elements that have been raised at this committee, but a driver that is in a situation where they are up against their 13 hours and it is important for them to finish the security of their load, which Ms. Ireland just said could be a situation where it's not optimal to maintain livestock on a trailer, that would qualify as a situation where a driver could finish and go just certainly above what that the regulations allow for in about an hour.
The definition of adverse driving conditions in the regulation means snow, sleet, fog, or other adverse weather or road conditions that were not known to a driver or a motor carrier dispatching a driver immediately before the driver began driving or could not reasonably be known to them. So that is the definition in the regulation. So that's the core of the how Section 76 needs to be interpreted with respect to the guidance. I would also note from a regulatory perspective that within the regulations there are limits on driving time as well as on duty time. So the driving time is 13 hours and 2 hours can be added in adverse conditions. Off-duty time, you can also defer 2 hours of off-duty time, which is so that accounts for things like loading, unloading, where you'd not be driving but you would be on duty.
But adverse conditions would not consider a situation of an unforeseen circumstance as it relates to the actual loading of the cattle.
It says,
just weather.
Other adverse weather or road conditions. That is the definition within the Act.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues, for allowing a little bit. As you can see, I took an interest in this, and I wanted to make sure that we get the questions on the record. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today. Ms. Vanstone from Transport Canada, thank you so much for taking the time this morning. And Dr. Mary Jane Ireland from the CFIA, thank you again, because you've been a regular witness, but important testimony, and thank you so much. Colleagues, we're going to move in camera to be able to talk about what we've discussed on ELD and some of the motions that have been presented and the direction of our committee. So we'll suspend momentarily, move in camera, and we'll go from there. Meeting suspended.